Fort Leavenworth, April 13th, 1961. Thunder cracks overhead. The wind shakes the prison stone. Inside the U.S. disciplinary barracks, known as the castle, the gallows wait. At 12:41 a.m., a trap door opens. A man falls. His life ends. That man was Private John Arthur Bennett, the last soldier ever executed by the U.S. military. Today, we trace how he got there from Virginia farmland to the hanging rope and what this final act says about power, race, law, and memory. You are listening to Deadly Truths. I'm Becca. This is Season 2, Leavenworth, Kansas. Halloween in the Big House. John Arthur Bennett was born on April 10th, 1936. In Virginia. He was one of 8 children in a sharecropping family. His childhood was marked by instability. He struggled in school. Some sources said he left as early as 4th grade. He suffered from epilepsy, reported dizzy spells, blackouts, and night terrors. His family history included mental illness. He had relatives that had been institutionalized. Suicide was in his lineage. By 18, Bennett enlisted in the Army. In the Army, he worked as an ammunition handler and a truck driver, assigned to the 11th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion near Salzburg, Austria. He had been stationed in Austria in late 1954 when the events that would define his life and his death unfolded. In December of 1954, just days before Christmas, Bennett left his post. According to reports, he wandered through civilian areas asking for a girl named Margie or Margot, even breaking into a few houses in confusion. People said he seemed disoriented, perhaps drunk, and in a confused state. That evening, an 11-year-old Austrian girl named Gertie, as many press accounts call her, was returning from errands. She was attacked in a meadow near Siesenheim. Bennett later confessed to law enforcement. He said he carried her about 25 yards into a field to avoid the road. Then he laid on top of her and had intercourse with her. He described it as lasting roughly around 5 minutes. He acknowledged that she did struggle and that she did scream twice. His unusual claim, and this is quoted, "I wish to state that I did not force her at all," end quote. Obviously, it's a very unsettling comment to make because it's an 11-year-old girl and she was screaming and struggling. But that statement, a claim of consensual act despite the violence that was involved, became part of the crux of defense arguments, though most found it implausible, as I just said. I mean, we're talking about an 11-year-old girl that he picked up and carried into the field. She made her way to an American officer's home after he had attacked and assaulted her. She was bloodied and, of course, very frightened. She was trying to explain to that officer in broken English who had attacked her. American MPs arrested Bennett at the base. He was at the movie theater just hours later. At trial, the victim testified and pointed him out from the stand. Bennett did not testify in his own defense. Bennett's court-martial began in Salzburg in early 1955. The trial lasted 5 days. Witnesses, physicians who examined the victim, local Austrian doctors testified she had been sexually assaulted. Also, the court heard medical testimony verifying trauma consistent with assault and that she had trouble speaking and was physically distressed. The defense attempted to raise Bennett's epilepsy, his cognitive issues, and his mental health history, but they did so weakly. One psychiatric evaluation by a Lieutenant Bateman suggested that Bennett's family history and neurological issues raised mitigation. But the court gave limited weight to this. I mean, at the end of the day, he did rape an 11-year-old girl. Deliberations were brief, just 25 minutes. before a guilty verdict of rape and attempted premeditated murder was handed down. The sentence was death by hanging. I'm not really sure from reading the records why they added that attempted premeditated murder, but I think it's because she was forced and she was bloodied when she did go to that officer's home. So she had not only been raped, but she had been physically assaulted. I think that's why they added the attempted premeditated murder. Also, I found some documents that said he just left her there in the field, just got up and walked away. Not only did he assault this little girl, but he then just left her in the field in the cold. It's important to know that the sentence was upheld through every level of military review. The Army Board, Court of Military Appeals, and finally approved by President per military law. In appeal, Bennett versus Davis, he challenged the adequacy of his counsel, the voluntariness of his confession. So there were questions as to if he was under duress during the confession. And then there was the racial prejudice at the trial. The appeals court rejected these arguments, agreeing the military tribunal had jurisdiction and that they had respected due process under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Once sentenced, Bennett's fate rested not just in courts, but in politics and mercy. In the White House, officials debated whether to grant clemency. They dispatched aides to Austria to locate the girl and her family, and they asked would the victim's family support sparing his life for the rape. Telegram pleas arrived from Austria. The victim's parents wrote that while their daughter had been severely harmed, they did not want Bennett to be executed. The victim, who by then was a teenager, also requested clemency. But President Kennedy, under pressure, declined to intervene, and he allowed that sentence to stand. During these final days, Bennett himself wrote to Kennedy, pleading for his life, referencing that the girl did not die and he did not feel, therefore, that he should be executed. One internal remark from a high-level advisor captured in archival discussions is quoted, "The last thing I would want to do is let this boy out because he is colored," end quote. That moment, that's not fictional, it's part of the record. Between 1955 and 1960, there were 8 white soldiers, so this is the same time frame, who were condemned to death for crimes that included rape and murder, but none of them were executed. Their sentences were commuted, overturned, or stayed. In stark contrast, there's 8 Black soldiers who were executed during this exact same era. Bennett's case was the final one, so obviously there's a big difference here, right? You've got white soldiers committing the same type of crimes, but they're not getting executed. Whereas you have this Black soldier who is part of several other Black soldiers who did get executed. Again, in my opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, if you're raping a young little girl, I really don't have much mercy in my heart for you, but I can't not talk about this without mentioning the facts, because the facts are important. When you have other soldiers committing the same types of crimes, but they're not executed. I just wanted to make that clear. So when you look at what historians have cited and wrote about this has been brought up, these facts, quite a bit for civil rights scholars as evidence as systematic racial bias in the military capital punishment. It's kind of hard not to address it, and you certainly can't ignore it. A storm did rage over Leavenworth, and guards later said lightning flickered across the walls of the prison and the wind hissed through those stone corridors. Bennett's final meal, he had shrimp cocktail with sauce, hot rolls, cake, peaches, milk, and coffee. He donned a plain uniform, met with a chaplain, shook hands, he knelt in prayer, and he said, "Pray for me." Some eyewitnesses reported his eyes appeared wild and confused. At 12:41 a.m. on the 13th, The drop was triggered. He was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. He was buried at Fort Leavenworth in the military prison cemetery quietly with no public ceremony. And in that moment, the U.S. military's practice of executing service members did come to an end. No soldier has been executed since. Bennett's execution stands legally clean in the record. Congress, the Army, the President all followed statutory procedures. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the president must personally approve an execution, and President Kennedy did. But moral and historical judgment is more tangled. The racial differences in military executions is stark. 8 white soldiers condemned in that same era did survive, and 8 black soldiers were executed. Bennett's death becomes not just the story of one man, but a lens into a system where race, power, mercy, and law collided. Some historians argue he was rightfully convicted. The testimony, the victim's identification, his confessions were all consistent. And obviously, when I was reading this story, I found it extremely upsetting. And it was really hard for me to feel bad for this guy. I mean, whenever you are attacking and raping anyone, I have little to no mercy for you. But there are others who argue that there's flaws in his defense, questions of mental health and voluntary confession and racial bias. They cast a shadow over absolute certainty. Fort Leavenworth's walls hold that tension. The castle is more than stone. It's a container for secrets, for judgments, for the lives lost behind bars. Bennett's execution remains part of that architecture. So, what do we say now? The official record affirms Bennett's guilt. His trial, appeal, execution followed the law. Yet we must also hold the questions in view. Were mental illness, coerced confessions, or racial bias in play? Could something like this happen today with DNA appeals and external oversight? And finally, what does it mean when the executed man's silence outlives him? When memory rests more in archives than in public conscience? His case forces us to grapple with the limits of justice when power is concentrated. Victims are voiceless, and one man's life becomes a mirror of systemic failure. Next, we leave the prison walls and step into the streets of Leavenworth. 1901, Fred Alexander, a black man, was dragged through the town, tortured, and burned alive in front of thousands. No one was ever held accountable. We'll reconstruct that horror, its roots in racial terror, and how a town could watch and stay silent. Until next time, keep looking for the truth, however dark it might be.